Hello and welcome to the Storm of Scripture. Today we're continuing to look for glimpses of the supernatural in the lives of the patriarchs of Genesis. Although today, as we look at the story of Judah, the emphasis is not so much on the supernatural, though there is an undercurrent of supernatural themes, as much as it is about pushing against the patriarchy that was the cultural norm of the day. In this chapter, Tamar proves herself to be more righteous than even the patriarch Judah. And for her actions, she is remembered in the genealogy of Jesus Christ given in Matthew's Gospel. Thank you for joining me today as we examine the treasures in Genesis chapter 38.
Today, we look at Judah. Judah is a little bit like Isaac, in that Isaac gets overshadowed by his father Abraham and then by his son Jacob. And there's only one real chapter in Genesis that Isaac gets to be the main actor of what's going on. And we looked at that chapter with Isaac. With Judah, again, Judah gets overshadowed by his father Jacob and by his brother Joseph. Yet Judah does stand out a little bit from the other 11 brothers with a few what we might call speaking lines. He does speak up in Joseph's behalf when the brothers throw him into the pit and think that the plan A is to kill him, and Judah intercedes against that plan. And later on, he does speak a little bit more kind of representing the 11 with Joseph. But as far as Judah giving his own story about himself, Genesis chapter 38 is really the only place where Judah is front and center and the only actor of the brothers in the story, which might be a little bit of a problem because Judah doesn't show out so well in Genesis chapter 38. But we're going to look at it. We'll just start with verse 1. It happened at this time that Judah went down from his brothers and pitched his tent near a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. So Judah literally separating himself from his brothers and his father to go down to live near this Adullamite. Who was the last person that we know who went and pitched his tent near a Canaanite environment? Remember Lot? He decided to separate from Abraham and he went and pitched his tent near Sodom and Gomorrah. Did that turn out so well with Lot? No. I was just thinking about this. The reason he had to separate from Abraham was because his sheep and his herds were too big to be alongside Abraham's. They had to separate because they were stepping on each other with their flocks. How many flocks did Lot have by the time the Sodom and Gomorrah got destroyed? As far as I know, 0. He was living in the city. He had no flocks or herds to speak of his own. But it's going to turn out about just as well for Judah to pitch his tent near this Adullamite named Hira. Once he gets down there, Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite there whose name was Shua. And he took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name Now what's the name of Judah's wife? The certain Canaanite is Shua. She doesn't get a name. We know her father's name. We know Judah's name. We know her son's names. We do not know her name. Except for not naming his wife, which just seems a little odd. There's not much that stands out here. But look at the pattern. Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite, and he took her to be his wife. He doesn't ask. He doesn't woo her in any way. He doesn't talk to her. He just takes her as his wife, and they have a child. When was the last time a group left where they were normally supposed to be, went and saw the daughters of men and decided to take what they wanted of them and have children by them? Back in Genesis chapter 6, the sons of God saw the daughters of humankind, that they were beautiful, and they took for themselves wives, all they chose. They just see what they want, and they go and take it. That is a pattern. It's a pattern from Genesis 38, followed in Genesis 6, and guess who, even before then, saw what they wanted and just took it? In Genesis chapter 3, verse 6, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit. There's a pattern. When you walk into a situation and you feel like you can just see what you want and take it, you are not in a good position. In Scripture, that is a bad pattern and a place to be. There is a certain presumption here. One might say a certain assumption of male dominance, that he can walk in and take the woman that he wants, and she doesn't have a say in the matter. Genesis chapter 38, I've begun to think of it as I've studied through it, is a chapter that highlights a double standard of men just getting away with what they want and women suffering because of it. Now, the Bible is often accused of promoting a double standard, of actually endorsing it. This chapter specifically reverses that. It acknowledges the double standard. Yes, there is one, but it does not, by any stretch of the imagination, endorse the double standard. And by putting Judah in this light from the very beginning, it starts this downward spiral for Judah. In verses 4 through 5, we read a little bit more about the family that Judah is starting. She conceived again and bore a son, and he called his name Onan. And once again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. And he was in Chezib when she bore him. I've become accustomed to stopping and checking when things seem out of the ordinary to me. And to me, just randomly saying she was in this town when she had this baby was odd to me. Because this town is otherwise pretty much unmentioned. Nothing else happens in Chezib that we read about. Why is it even bother to tell us that she was in Chezib when she had this baby? It doesn't even play a role in the rest of the story, this Chezib. So I went kind of on a little tangent. I'm going to try to briefly bring you up to speed on the tangent. What is up with Chezib? Later on, it seems to be called Akzib. It's the same consonant letters in Hebrew, so it's probably the same town. Akzib and Chezib are the same place, just with a variant pronunciation. Well, if we look through the chapter, this is one of several places that are mentioned. The Adullamite is obviously from a town named Adullam. So pitching your tent near an Adullamite means that you're near the town of Adullam. And then it mentions that he's in Chezib when his son is born, Judah is. And then later on, they go to Timnah. I'm going to not read the whole verse. We'll get to verse 12 in a bit, but I just want to highlight the fact that it mentions that they're on their way to Timnah. And then there's this other place where Tamar, which we haven't met yet, but she is out there looking for Judah, and she's in yet another place called Enayim. Interesting place name. It means eyes. You don't know. If you're paranoid, you might not want to live in a city named Eyes, because their eyes are always looking at you in that Enayim. Well, what is it about these places? I couldn't find anything particularly about Akzib or Chezib that was particularly stand out. So I just was kind of is it about because where it is? So I looked at a map. Here are the 4 places that are mentioned, and you can kind of see Hebron is not mentioned here in the chapter, but it is a nearby major city that we're familiar with, mostly from Joshua's stories and so on later on. So you can kind of get oriented to where all 4 of these little places are. Well, as it turns out, all 4 of these places are in Judah, what will become Judah, the place where the tribe of Judah is allocated, their place to live. Again, those 4 other places don't come up on this map. I can never find a map that has everything I want on it in one place. I'm always having to compromise with my maps. But you can see Hebron on this map because it is a major city even down the road. And so you can orient that those 4 places are all in Judah. So you can kind of figure that maybe the story, in addition to telling us a story about Judah personally, is connecting Judah to his territory. Because people who live in the tribe of Judah can say, Judah lived here, Judah slept here in this area, because they have a connection in their tribe to their own patriarch in the place where they live, as Judah was right there with them. Every one of these patriarchs moved their sheep around. They never stayed in one place for long. Sometimes they stayed in a place maybe for a few years, but they didn't have permanent dwelling. So he moved between these places. Moving on to the story. The story jumps like 20 years. I don't know exactly how long it takes to get from being born to getting a wife, but there's a big jump in the story in verses 6 and 7. because in those verses we read that Judah took a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. And the firstborn of Judah, was evil in the eyes of Yahweh, and Yahweh killed him. This is the first time that we read of Yahweh killing a particular person. Now, Yahweh's wiped out the entire population of the earth before by sending the flood, all but Noah and his family. So it's not that God has not acted to judge evil by killing those who are evil. But this is the first time he singles out a particular person and kills him for his evil. And it's Dare I say this is another connection to that story from Genesis 6, because the offspring of those sons of God and the daughters of men were evil and created evil. His offspring by the unnamed woman is He marries Tamar, and then he's so evil that God kills him. And I can't help but introduce the linguistic fun things that I find in Scripture. And nearly every commentary points this out. This is verse 7 in Hebrew. The first one, which is read right to left, the first word at the top is Vayehi, and it happened that that's E-R in Hebrew, the firstborn of Judah, Yehuda, his name, and then the last word on that top line is Ra, it's evil. You see the two letters of name and the two letters of the name Ra are the same two letters, just flipped. It does seem like that's more than a coincidence. I've been listening to some Bible commentaries that seem to point out that reversing the order of the letters is another wordplay that is more common than I expected. This isn't terribly unusual that you reverse the orders and come up with something that where the writer is intentionally trying to make a connection between the ideas by flipping the words, the letters of the word. I have to look into that more. But anyway, is Ra. Is evil, according to the Scripture. And so there was a condition for this, a situation that would come into play when a brother dies without children. And in 38:8, we hear this rule being applied. That Judah said to Onan, "Go in to the wife of your brother, perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother." This is what will be called later, when the law of Moses is given, it has the term of levirate marriage. Here it's just a custom that is practiced. As an adult brother to it was his obligation to make sure that had an heir. And the only way to do that would be to sire a child by Er's widow. What takes 6 words, perform the duty of a brother-in-law, that whole phrase is one word in Hebrew, and it basically is just the word be a brother-in-law. To be a brother-in-law, a verb that means that. Go be a brother-in-law and have the child. That's your job, it's your duty. We've read in verse 9 and 10, Onan knew that the offspring would not be for him. It would be his brother's heir, not his own, his brother's heir. It would go from Judah to to this child. Onan and Onan's own children would not be getting the lion's share of the inheritance if he had a child by Tamar. Whenever he went in to the wife of his brother, he would waste it on the ground, his semen, so that as not to give offspring to his brother. And what he did was evil in the sight of Yahweh, so he killed him also. So we don't know what did to get God's wrath on him, but we do know what Onan did. He refused to give a heir to his brother. So now is dead, Onan is dead. So Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Stay a widow in your father's house until Shelah, my son, grows up." For he feared he would also die like his brother. So Tamar went and stayed in the house of her father. Now, when Tamar married she became a part of his household, effectively a part of Judah's household. For Judah to send her away to her own father's household was a bit of an insult that he didn't want her around. Surely, okay, Sheila's too young to have children. Fine, we can wait. But she should have been welcome to wait in Judah's own household until the time when Sheila grew up. And we read a little bit later why Judah wanted her away from the family. He didn't want her to know when Sheila was old enough. He wanted just to keep putting it off. That would be hard to do if they're living in the same camp. What also does it say that he has some anxiety about Tamar? Judah blames Tamar for the death of and the death of Onan. Did Tamar have anything to do with either one of those things? No. It was fault. It was Onan's fault. So Judah has no justification, really, for sending Tamar away. His anxiety is just blaming her for his own son's faults. But he blames her and then sends her away to her father's household and then basically forgets about her. In verses 12 and 13, we read, "It was told to Tamar, saying, 'Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep.' So she removed the clothes of her widowhood and covered herself with the veil and disguised herself, and she sat at the entrance to Anaim, which is on the way to Timnah, for she saw that Sheila was grown, but she had not been given to him as a wife." There's the problem. And she disguised herself and sat at the entrance of Anaim. I wonder why she thought that would work. Look what happens in verses 14 through 18. Judah saw her, again with the seeing and taking. Judah saw her and reckoned her to be a prostitute. Has she said anything? Has she approached him at all? Has she solicited him in any way? No, she did not. Judah saw her and reckoned her to be a prostitute, for she had covered her face. And he turned aside to her at the roadside and said, "Please come, let me come in to you." For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, "What will you give me to that you may come in to me?" And he said, "I'll send a kid from the goats of the flock." And she said, "Only if you give a pledge until you send it." And he said, "What is the pledge that I must give you?" And she said, "Your seal, your cord, and your staff that is in your hand." And he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. It would be a jaw-dropping moment for anybody to hear this story in that culture and to think that you would give it up. It's like giving a prostitute your passport, your driver's license, and your car keys, just so I can have sex. And then when I can send you some actual cash, you'll give me back my car keys, my passport, and my driver's license. He does try to pay the debt later on and get his stuff back. This is what happens in verses 20 through 23. Judah sent the kid from the goats by the hand of his friend the Adulamite to take back the pledge from the hand of the woman. But he could not find her. So he asked the men of the place, saying, "Where is that cult prostitute that was at Anaim by the roadside?" And they said, "There's no cult prostitute here." Then he returned to Judah and said, "I could not find her." Moreover, the men of the place said, "There's no cult prostitute here." And Judah said, "Well, let her take them for herself, lest we be laughed at. Behold, I sent this kid, but you could not find her." This interesting word, this cult prostitute, it's not the same word that was used earlier when it said that Judah saw a prostitute or thought she was a prostitute. There's two words for prostitute in the Old Testament. The first one that Judah used or thought when he was seeing Tamar was zonah. A zonah would occasionally or professionally commit fornication, a prostitute, a harlot. It was a common person looking for money for sex, trading money for sex as a profession. It could also be used as an insult for a woman that you wanted to put down, like a slut or something, like a common put down for a woman. So it could be used that way. That's how it's used of Tamar when Judah assesses her as one, and then later. Then the word here, though, for cult prostitute is kedesha, which is interesting because it's actually a form of the word kadosh, which means holy. But these were women who were dedicated to a temple prostitution sort of thing. Sex with them was a form of worship of the pagan god because they were part and parcel of a pagan worship process. So when the Adulamite goes to ask about her, I don't know whether he's giving her the benefit of the doubt that she's actually doing this for a good reason, for as a part of a worship experience as opposed to for money. But he describes her as this Kadesha, and they say, "No, we don't use Kadesha here. This town doesn't have them. We don't have a cult prostitute thing here in this town. It's Anaim. It's a tiny little town, unlikely to have had that kind of worship center. where that would have been the case. And surely they said, no, there's no one like that here. And so they go back and he says, no, there's not there. Those commentators that I read said that Adulamite is trying to put a nicer, softer edge on this situation when he goes and asks about this situation. But think about it. Is it really better for Judah to be worshiping a foreign god through sex with a prostitute than it is for him just to be paying for sex? This is not a good situation either way you look at it. Again, we have a little leap of time, a little shorter leap this time, about 3 months in verse 24. About 3 months later, it was told to Judah, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the whore. That's Zonah, a verb form of Zonah. She's been a prostitute. Now, behold, she is conceived by prostitution. And Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. Burned? I looked it up. This is the first time anyone in Scripture has suggested burning as a penalty for a sinful act. There are few ways to die worse than being burned. It is painful. And you know how it is to be burned. You've probably burned yourself on a stove or with something hot. Think about that over your entire body. Crucifixion might be close to the same kind of level of pain because it takes longer for you to suffocate on a cross, but it's still a horrible way to die. And it's Judah's suggestion that they burn his own daughter-in-law, the wife of his son, I'm appalled by everything in this story. But where did he get the idea that this was something to do? Well, I'm going to jump ahead a bit on a bit of a tangent that will, I think, explain where Judah comes up with this idea that Tamar should be burned for this act. Judges, Samson. You remember Samson? Big, strong guy. Also has a tendency to take things that he wants without asking, or with asking, but demanding in the ask. Well, in Judges 15, we see Samson, who has married a woman, but had been separated from her for a little while. And so he decides he's going to go visit her. So in Judges 15, after a while, at the time of the wheat harvest, Samson visited his wife with a young goat. I don't know where the goats are coming into these stories also. That's an interesting thread to look at. He said, I want to go to my wife's private room, but her father would not allow him to enter. Her father said, I really thought you hated her, because he'd been gone for a while. I'm just adding that, but that's in the story. Samson left and has been gone for a while, and so he comes back with the goat, thinking that's going to make everything better for being gone for a while. But then her father says, I thought you had hated her, so I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Please take her instead. And Samson said to them, this time, as far as the Philistines are concerned, when I do something evil, I am without blame. Unpacking that is a little bit of its own thing for Samson to blame others for his evil acts. But in verses 4 through 6, Samson went and captured 300 foxes. He took torches. He turned them tail to tail. He put one torch between the two tails, and he set fire to the torches and let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines. Look, that's one of those pictures that they even do in VBS sometimes with the foxes burning the grain. It's an interesting picture. But let's read the rest of the story. He burned both the stacks of the sheaves and the standing grain up to the vineyards of olive groves. And the Philistines said, who's done this? And they said, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite. Timnite, that's someone from Timnah. Interesting connection. Timnah is in the area. Because he took his wife and gave her to his companion. And the Philistines went up and burned her and her father with fire. It is a Canaanite custom to take people who have caused problems or been the root cause of a problem and burn them. So when Judah says, let's take out Tamar for prostitution and burn her, he is acting like a Canaanite. He is absolutely just falling in with Canaanite customs and habits and saying, this is what we need to do. Well, the other shoe is about to drop. In verses 25 through 26, she was brought out, and she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man to whom these belong, I have conceived. And she said, now discern to whom these belong, the seal and the cord and the staff. Then Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not know her again. Here's the double standard being brought into public view. It's okay for you to sleep with a prostitute, but if some woman is accused of it, you're going to burn her alive. Talk about the double standard, but she calls him on it with these things that she kept. And he admits that she is more righteous than I. I think that is an absolute repudiation of the double standard that is being exhibited throughout this chapter. The only person in this whole story who is consistently devoted to a principle is Tamar. She is devoted to her husband as bad as he was. She was his wife, and she was obligated to have his heir. And the only persons who could have that heir would be Judah. The first thought would be one of his sons. But if that's not going to happen, Judah himself could sire an heir. Tamar is the only one who could do it. And Judah was the only one who could also do it. So she put the two and two together and had the heir for her husband. She was faithful to her husband. Not even Judah was faithful to her son, because he didn't let Shelah sire a child. So finally, Judah does say the right thing and do the right thing. He does honor the sons that she had. Although he doesn't take her as a wife, the son that she's going to have by this union would be the heir. Well, we know those sons' names because they figure into Jesus' genealogy. So you jump all the way to Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron. So these two children are heirs, technically of Ur doesn't get a mention in the genealogy, but technically Judah had and then Ur's heir would have been Perez and Zerah, Perez being the oldest, the heir that carries forward the line. I think the whole point of this genealogy, just to wrap up here, look who else is in the genealogy. I won't read all the names, but Tamar is in the genealogy. Rahab is in the genealogy. She was a prostitute. I mean, for reals. Ruth was a Moabitess, a Gentile. Also kind of the levirate marriage thing was working in her favor. And the wife of Uriah. I mean, Bathsheba doesn't get her name, but it's the wife of Uriah. I think she's called that because it emphasizes Uriah was a Hittite. Likely so was his wife. But we all know how David and the wife of Uriah ended up together. Jesus' genealogy is a testimony to sin will not derail God's plan. And Jesus redeems the sin. Jesus redeems all of that situation by coming in and turning it all on its head and bringing grace and forgiveness into the story. A story of brokenness and of hatred and of sin and all of the bad things that people are guilty of. They're all in Jesus' story. But Jesus flips it all and redeems us and gives us forgiveness and grace. I think that's as much about what Matthew's genealogy is about, as much as it is merely a lineage. It's about forgiveness and redemption.
Thank you again for studying the Bible with me as we look at the glimpses of the supernatural in Genesis. I'd love to hear from you, either through a comment on YouTube or a comment on the Storeroom of Scripture Facebook group. I look forward to our time together again when we will examine the treasures in the biblical text.